has been working hard to set up. We have a lot of protesters and a few journalists who have been involved in the protests for the last few months, and they're here to tell us their side of the story as to what their experience has been regarding the police, regarding the marches, and several other things in general. So the first guest we have on, his name is Vishal, and he is a journalist. He is on Instagram. You've probably seen his posts. If you haven't, he's doing a lot of really great and brave work. And Vishal, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Vishal, let's just start off with the basics. How has your experience been in general? And as a journalist as well, and here in LA, and actually, what got you involved into this, and what were you doing right before?
Sure. Well, it's been interesting to say the least. In terms of the current movement and documenting it, before it, I was just a documentary filmmaker working a variety of projects. And as you know, following George Floyd's death, as protests started picking up, I was originally going purely as a protester, although, my natural instinct as a filmmaker is just to film everything I see anyways. And as things progressed, as the footage I started capturing started garnering more traction, I realized there was somewhat of a responsibility I started to have of trying to accurately portray and report on what was going on, because after the first couple of weeks, a lot of the mainstream journalists stopped doing it. And I thought it was really important that this story didn't just get buried, didn't get forgotten, that people understand that these protests continued to go every single day for over 100 days. And they've progressively gotten more and more intense due to violence ramping up from law enforcement. So I wanted to make sure people were seeing that. It was documented, it was visible for everyone to see.
And well, just what was your experience in reference of dealing with the counter protest movement, like dealing with people who, for instance, supported the police, or with the police themselves?
So, in terms of the Trump base, I've experienced them several times. I think a lot of people would be surprised. They have large numbers to mobilize in somewhere like Los Angeles County, but in places like Tahunga, Sunland, and even Beverly Hills, and Hollywood as well, they've been extremely active, extremely violent, and working with white supremacist groups like the Proud Boys and the Three Percenters, and also coordinating pretty directly and overtly with law enforcement, who kind of just oversees and allows them to engage in violence against both protesters and the media and journalists alike, which is a good way to transition to law enforcement, which has also progressively become more and more antagonizing, obviously towards activists, but also towards journalists, just showing what they're doing. I think, especially in Los Angeles, LAPD and LASD have a pretty powerful control and influence over the media, and they take their propaganda war very seriously, more seriously than a lot of other cities that have become hotbeds for activisms and uprisings as well. And so it's actually been surprising, well, not surprising, but alarming to see how consistent law enforcement has been with targeting journalists with direct violence, with arrest, with surveillance. It's been very overt, and it's only picked up since everything began in late May.
Yeah, yeah. And we live in a Democratic supermajority. I mean, we live in California, one of the most Democratic states in the country, meaning all of the officials are Democrats. We have a Democratic mayor, a Democratic governor, two female Democratic senators. We also have a Democratic DA, Jackie Lacey. How do you feel the leaders have done regarding police brutality and economic aid to the community?
Well, to me, it seems like the Democrat, especially in California, approach has been a very whitewashed liberal version of white supremacy. The belief that if you keep all the policies the same, but you use proper diction and you use proper terminology and you use the tolerant voice without actually following it up with action, Democrats in California seem to believe they can get away with the same kind of violence that you can see in places that are not Democratic controlled and have more conservative and right wing viewpoints in politics, local politics, as well as within the actual base and constituents of those counties. Los Angeles has a very left-leaning, liberal-leaning constituency, and even so, they have not really had a mechanism to hold local officials accountable for their complete betrayal of their alleged policy stances in terms of supporting Black Lives Matter, supporting progressive politics. Seems to have been consistently just a front. I mean, I have been calling my own local officials, my city council member, as well as the mayor's office, as well as Gavin Newsom's office, about the events that I've been witnessing and documenting since May 30th. And I never get a call back from them. I never get really through the initial layer of, oh, here's someone to talk to that you can just rant to that's not actually going to convey your constituent concerns to your elected officials. So it's really just been a consistent level of apathy and I would argue arrogance for them to think that they can just get away with doing the opposite of what they're saying they're doing. There's a lack of respect they have for their voters and constituency, and it shows. And I think they don't think we notice, but we really do.
Yeah. And speaking of the mechanisms, how do you define abolishing the police or defunding the police versus like reforming the police? And what do you think is the best path forward?
Well, I have leaned towards defunding for a while, but now I've kind of understood we're in a position where unless we have a full abolitionist viewpoint of the policing system in this country, with the understanding that it follows the lineage of slave catching patrols, the 13th Amendment and the prison system kept slavery alive. If we don't commit to abolition, we're going to continue seeing this cycle of violence towards people of color, especially the Black community, because that's what it was designed to do. And to not think that that's what it's here for is, it shows an ignorance of history, it shows an ignorance of precedent. And, we've tried reforms. We've tried the simple budget cuts and taking things down. And what we've seen is all of these changes, however progressive they seem to be in the moment, they eventually over time get rolled back. And they're never, they don't have sustainability because the apparatus that law enforcement has with government, it's too large and you can't really reform it. You have to kind of remove it and replace it with a new mentality of community security, community safety, changing the focus to dealing with mental health issues and taking care of the community so that the problems that crime arises from and that is used to perpetuate why we should have law enforcement in the first place, make sure those problems stop happening at such a prevalency. And I think if you start actually dealing with the root causes rather than just using a baton to hit the symptoms over and over again, you might actually solve something rather than just reacting to police. I mean, even law enforcement will admit they don't really solve crime, they react to it. So until we change the way we look at coming up with those solutions, we're going to stay in the same cycle.
And what do you say to the people that say, well, we need police because we need security. We need to keep criminals off the street. What do you say to that sort of questioning?
Sure. It's a rational questioning. And, everyone wants to be safe. Everybody wants security. What I would argue is that I don't think the police have been doing that. I mean, I have noticed, especially in communities of low income and of heavy minority demographics, law enforcement doesn't really respond as consistently to people being in trouble, people needing help of someone that can offer security. And not only that, they're not really dealing with the issue of actually removing the root causes of crime in the first place. So if you're not going to solve what's creating a society that keeps pushing violent crime and keeps having that be an issue, and you're not going to react to it when those people ask for some form of help that you claim that you're giving, then you're not really doing the role of security, and you're kind of getting credit for something that usually the community takes care of itself.
And while we're talking about police brutality and racial justice, and that is on the forefront, we're also seeing protests to cancel rent and protests to get rid of ICE and immigration rights. There are also many issues that have come up during the pandemic, like lack of health care. And so should protesters and leftists be fighting against who are fighting against the corruption of police also be fighting for these issues in a way to sort of build solidarity and grow the movement?
Absolutely. And I would even say more than solidarity, I think they are the same movement. I think these struggles are very much linked when you look at not just the logistical, what specific thing they deal with, whether it's healthcare or rent, but rather when you look at the consequences of those actions, when you realize that the end result of all of these systems of oppression is usually just people of color, minorities, and low income people getting hurt more and more. And when you kind of take away all the scene dressing, you realize they're all part of different systems that are part of the same goal, which is to make life even more difficult for people who have it hard already.
Yeah. And a lot of people, have said that the protests are violent and have used that violent looters narrative. The sheriff's department is using the outside agitators narrative. If the protests, though, in your experience, because in my experience covering them, they have been majorly peaceful, and even if not peaceful, entirely nonviolent. If the protests have been like that, should the protesters change their tactics? Because it seems like that no matter what they do, the narrative gets twisted. Or is violence absolutely uncalled for?
I'm not one for telling someone how to protest. I think everybody has something different to bring to the table, and that diversity of thought and tactics is what makes the left's coalition so powerful. We have a wide tent, and that tent, people like to criticize it because there's a lot of internal arguments, but I think that is what makes it so broad in terms of the ways we can fight back. I do think it is concerning. Most of the protests I've been to, the activists have remained peaceful, but I wouldn't call them peaceful protests because of the violence from law enforcement. It's been so overbearing. Just yesterday, Alex Villanueva went on his Instagram Live and was saying, oh, if these were peaceful protesters, why are they coming in football pads and helmets? Well, they're coming because that's a reaction to the violence that they've been experiencing when they came peacefully and dressed the way they dress when they go to work. So I do think there needs to be a change in tactics. I think people need to really take community-based self-defense and community security very seriously. And that doesn't just go for issues of crime, it also goes for protecting each other from law enforcement. There has been this belief that activists and protesters should just stand by and take it when experiencing all of this kind of brutality. And whether or not you believe they should fight back or not, it's unreasonable to expect them not to. If you're getting hit, doesn't matter how tolerant and quiet of a person you are, it's only going to be a matter of time before you defend yourself. And self-defense is something I think is not a controversial issue. It only becomes controversial when you're self-defending against the government. And in that situation, who decides what is self-defense? Who decides when the aggressor is the one defining who can and who can't be defended against? Especially when you have law enforcement breaking their own rules, breaking their own laws, collaborating with right-wing terrorists like what you saw in Kenosha. Even here, I've seen officers walk up to members of the Proud Boys right after they assaulted protesters and journalists, even myself, and I literally caught them on camera speaking to those same Proud Boys and saying, quote, "We got to work together." So if they're already engaging in extrajudicial violence, then it's not unreasonable, nor is it, I would argue it's not even about reasonability, it's about unfairness if you're going to expect people to not defend themselves.
And speaking of the police working with the protesters, we have seen the LAPD and the LASD use military grade weapons on peaceful protesters, arresting them with little cause. We've also seen the rubber bullets and the shooting come at journalists as well. So across the pond right now, we have a very big case with a journalist named Julian Assange, who is in jail for merely publishing U.S. war crimes and letting the American people know what the government was hiding. And they're accusing him of hacking just for releasing and doing what a journalist does. Do you know about this trial? And if not, what's your opinion on the attack of some journalists? Because if they go after Julian Assange, who's not even an American, who's literally across the pond, and they're trying to extradite him for this, doesn't that also affect the journalists at home as we're seeing more and more of them be jailed and arrested by police?
Absolutely. I think the Julian Assange case really is emblematic of the United States as a whole shift in how they treat journalism. You'll note that they aren't charging him as if he's a journalist. They're treating him like he's a spy. And, if you're going to use the Espionage Act and things like that to go after journalists who are serving the people with information, then what you're really saying is you think the people are a enemy combatant. You think they are the enemy of the state. And that the mentality that the government has used to kind of rationalize doing to Julian Assange what you would do to a spy of a foreign nation, it speaks a lot because, even in the public opinion, someone like Daniel Ellsberg is respected as a hero, but Julian Assange doing the same thing digitally in the modern era, all of a sudden that has a different connotation. Doesn't really make sense. And once you start qualifying what is a good journalist, what is a bad journalist, who's real media, who's fake media, then you really open up the doors to kind of ending press freedom as we know it. And I think that really it really contextualizes how law enforcement has been able to rationalize their consistent attacks on the press everywhere, even here in Los Angeles. I have seen them arrest members of the press. I have seen them assault members of the press until they were unconscious. I have been shot twice as a member of the press with my press badge clearly present. I have been batoned. I've had all these things happen to me, even when they know who I am. In fact, it's become apparent that they target journalists because they know who they are. I've had officers come up to me many, many times and say, "Oh yeah, you're Vishal Singh. We know your videos. We watch you." And at those same actions, I'm specifically targeted with violence. So it tells me they actually see journalists as the enemy, and that goes for law enforcement, that goes for the federal government, that goes for everyone. And if we lose that, we really lose our ability to have a democratic society, because how can you trust what people are saying if you're not allowing the perspectives of the entire people to be able to voice themselves, whether they're a mainstream outlet like MSNBC or whether they're just citizen journalists like me who know the trade and pick up a camera and just start reporting for free. If we're not given that opportunity to safely show what is happening, then your narratives are going to become not reliable, and then you're not going to have a educated populace. You're going to have people who just believe whatever they're told.
Exactly. And right now it's Biden versus Trump in the mainstream Democratic versus Republican parties. Are you voting, and do you think your vote counts? Does it directly affect you here being in California?
In terms of the presidential election, I do not believe my vote counts. I think voting is still important for local elections, propositions, for the races of the Senate and of getting the House of Congress. But when it comes to the presidential election, I think we've learned that between the systems of gerrymandering and the Electoral College, there really is not any evidence to suggest that in the modern era, the people decide the presidency. I mean, I was born in 1993, which means 50% of the presidents I have been alive for were inaugurated with less votes than the person they were running against. That's 50%. That's an F. That's a failure. And for me, just in terms of my lifetime, I've never seen any evidence that this country allows its people to choose the president. It seems to be something that's decided by districts being drawn by parties who already won elections. It seems to be decided by a small group of electors that through systems like faithless electors can even vote against what their districts tell them to vote for. And when you have so many systems in place to kind of act as filters to prevent the actual constituents from choosing the leader of the highest office in the land, I think it's irresponsible for people to frame that election as something that we are in charge of. And I think it's even worse to frame it as a form of activism that can solve these problems. I mean, voting against Trump isn't going to help fix the problem that led us to a society that would have Trump be president in the first place.
Exactly, Vishal. Is there anything else you want to tell people before you head out?
I think I really want people to understand that we're not just in the midst of a rising era of protests in this country. This is actually an uprising and a revolution that's not alone and segregated to the United States. We're seeing actions like this happen in Lebanon, in Belarus, in Chile, in Hong Kong. This really is the beginnings of a world revolution. And I think we really need to start contextualizing it and looking at it like that, because if we keep staying in our own bubbles, we're going to not realize that while our inciting incidents for these revolutions are different, our struggles are actually the same. And we really need to take this seriously. It's not just another story to scroll past. It's not just a moment. It really is a movement, a worldwide movement, not just for one group or one city or one county or one country.
All right, Vishal, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate you. And we're going to go on a quick break, you guys, and we'll be right back with some more protesters and journalists. We're back with our next guest. His name is Sean Beckner-Carmichael, and he has also been attending the protests as a journalist, a citizen journalist. Sean, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, awesome. So let's get to it, Sean. What's your experience been in general in these protests in LA, and why did you start attending and documenting them?
Well, I think I should say that I started originally because this country has a moral failing, it has a constitutional failing, and it has a political failing. We have done a bad job of reconciling our genocide in the past. This country was started on a genocide of Native Americans. We brought it through a genocide of Black people, and we are continuing to, through economic, through political, through educational, and through police and law enforcement means, continuing this genocide. It is a moral failing. We can't just reform the system. We have to create a new system that works for every single member of this country. As far as what it's been like filming, it has been incredibly dangerous. It has been very difficult, and I put a lot of that on the fact that the police are willing to brutalize anyone who is in the way of them continuing to brutalize, continuing to shoot, continuing to maim, continuing to kill Black and brown people in this country. As someone who's filming, as someone who's journaling, as someone who's releasing information, it is a priority of law enforcement to get anyone who is doing that out of the way so that they can continue to brutalize protesters. So I've been to the hospital, I think 4 times. I've had to receive medical attention in some way from either an EMT or a doctor, probably 5 times. And I've really only been out for this wave of protests that are done in the wake of the murder of George Floyd for about 3.5 months. So I'm averaging needing medical attention once every about 1.5 to 2 weeks. It has been getting more brutal from the law enforcement the past month. I've been averaging having to get medical attention once per week, roughly. And the police, law enforcement, those sorts of things have really stepped up their tactics. It bears mentioning that because we're filming right now, just gathering a few citizen journalists has invited a helicopter that was actually checking on things before, I'm told. There is a police car that's actually currently kind of running around the block.
Wow.
So we're being singled out, we're being followed, in addition to protesters as well.
Wow. And you know, I asked Fiorella this similar question. We live in a democratic state. I mean, everybody we have is a Democrat, and somehow there is still not a defunding the police. DA Jackie Lacey refuses to prosecute killer cops. What should these leaders be doing instead of what they're doing? I
do apologize. I'm having some audio issues hearing you.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So I asked Fiorella a similar question. We have a Democratic supermajority in California, yet DA Jackie Lacey refuses to prosecute many of these law enforcement officials. And we also aren't talking about defunding the police in LA County. What should these leaders do to get you and other people on their side?
I do apologize. I didn't hear the full question, but I did hear kind of questions about there being a supermajority in California.
Yeah.
We only have 2 major political parties in this country. We have Democrat, we have a Republican party. I would say that personally, I think that one of the most important things to be fighting against is, yes, of course, Republican hatred. But we also really have to keep in mind that Democrats are also full of very privileged people with racist backgrounds. The best way that I can describe it is Republicans were fighting against their active hatred, and we're fighting against Democratic complacency. The Democrats in California, particularly in this city, have not done absolutely anything to prevent violence against protesters. Mm-hmm. We are in Los Angeles right now. We can speak to the fact that the Los Angeles Police Department, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department have killed hundreds of people just in the last few years. So when people say that there's an answer with the Democratic Party, I'm skeptical. I don't think that they really truly have the will of the people in mind. I think that their goal is to make incredibly small reforms so that they can continue in office and keep their very centrist base happy. But as far as real change, as far as an actual solution, I think we need to look outside of the Democrat and the Republican Party, and I think we need to make up our own rules. And I think that we need to start with the prevention of Black genocide. I think that we need to start with the prevention of economic inequality, particularly with Black, brown, and Native people. And I think that in order to do that, we have to look outside just voting for a Democrat. We have to look outside of the Republican Party, and we need to really start holding our leaders accountable, or if they won't be held accountable, which is how I feel is going on right now, we need to create our own leaders, we need to create our own systems, and we need to do it now.
And regarding that, How does that happen? If not electorally, is there a mass movement that can happen that includes economics and it includes other issues to bring people in as part of one big movement against the status quo?
I think we're seeing that now. I think that we are seeing that now. I think that we are seeing the Black Lives Matter movement become a movement that understands that economic inequality is also violence against Black people. Educational inequality is also violence against Black people. It is a refusal to give them the tools that they need to succeed. And we're seeing people from many different sides of the movement. We are seeing people whose priority is to fix educational opportunity. We're seeing people who are really prioritizing making sure that people are not being evicted in their homes, because Black and brown people happen to, on average, have less income in their bank account. We are going to see mass evictions coming very, very soon. And when we see those mass evictions, Black and brown people are going to be the group that receives the most evictions. They are going to be on the street. And we're seeing organizations like Los Angeles Tenants Union step up on the eviction front. We're seeing organizations like POC for BLM speaking on the fact that Black people, particularly in this country, do not receive the same health care, even when they have the same insurance. We're seeing elements that are focused on community policing being a focus. We're seeing elements of making sure that there's accountability in government. And all of those things are important, and all of those things are necessary to prevent the injustice in this country.
So you're a white young man. So let me ask you what a lot of the white working class often says about this situation. They say, well, I am white and I'm poor, and the government has also forgotten me as well. What about poverty for them? A lot of these people are sometimes against reparations because they themselves are poor. How do we get past that hurdle of that?
As far as reparations specifically, I think that if we're talking about the taxation system in this country, we need to reform that too. When we're talking about equal opportunity, when we're talking about equal access, we can't have equal access and equal opportunity without the way that we tax in this country being changed dramatically. When we have people that are worth hundreds of billions of dollars hoarding that wealth, using that wealth towards gaining more wealth, and when we have systems in this country that not only prevent them from being taxed, but actively sign contracts and actively seek out corporate welfare, while there are people in this country who are struggling. Some of them, yes, are white. I grew up from a very poor white background myself. And the reality is the experience of a poor white person is still more upwardly mobile as far as potential as a Black person in the same background. So when I hear that people have the same struggles, as someone who did grow up extremely poor, I just don't agree. It's just not true. I grew up seeing Black teenagers in this country be arrested, be detained, be put in the system for things that I was actively doing right next to them. So when we talk about reparations specifically, I would love to see those come from people who have hundreds of billions of dollars, people who have the GDP of medium-sized countries exist as one person. So when I hear there's no money for reparations, yes, there is. The Walton family alone could probably pay a significant portion of that. Yeah,
absolutely. A lot of people have been saying in the mainstream media, both in the Democratic and Republican side, that the protests, they're all fine for peaceful protesting, but they're not fine with the looting and the rioting. In your experience, what is the truth in that sort of statement?
So first of all, I want to be very clear. As far as I keep hearing, what about all the looting? I myself have attended a protest almost every single day for the last, I think it's been 4 months. I have not personally seen an act of looting since I think 3 days after George Floyd was murdered. That being said, when I hear looting, when I hear rioting, my question is this: what is a riot? Because I've been part of a protest that was absolutely nonviolent, many protests actually, that was 100% nonviolent, no acts of any sort of violence, even vandalism. And we were shot, we were maimed, we had grenades thrown at us. I was at a press conference about 2 weeks ago, and that press conference, which was held by the National Lawyers Guild, was kettled. It was literally surrounded by sheriffs who we were protesting against in riot gear. There was no one there but lawyers, members of the press, and speakers. And their response was grenades, batons, tear gas, riot trucks, a thing called an LRAD, which is essentially a sonic weapon. So at some point we have to ask, why are we not holding our law enforcement to a standard of no riots? Why are they allowed to go into communities, commit violence, vandalize those communities with weapons, with spent shells? Why are they allowed to gas a community to get what they want, while Black people aren't even allowed to kneel in the street? So as far as rioting goes, we need to look inward as a country. We need to ask why our law enforcement is allowed to commit violence every single day. We need to ask why our law enforcement is allowed to group up together in gangs and terrorize communities before we can really get upset about a trash can on fire.
Yeah, and you've been documenting and filming these protests as a citizen journalist. And like I asked Fiorella before, there is a journalist across the pond who has been jailed, and he's not even from America. He's Australian, and he's in Britain right now holding a trial. His name is Julian Assange. Now, that trial, they're trying to paint him as being like a hacker and spy and a traitor. As a journalist, how does that make you feel in terms of how the police have been treating journalists?
I do apologize. I'm having some audio issues.
Okay, give me 1 second. Can you hear me right now?
I can hear you all right. I know that I'm...
Okay.
I can speak on the Assange trial, if you'd like. As far as Julian Assange goes, while he is a very complicated figure, I think that one thing that we have to do, and we have to examine in this country, as someone who myself has some concerns about being jailed, as someone who has concerns and can show evidence that I am being followed by law enforcement, it is really troubling that we in this country, we in the United States of America, who consistently place ourselves as a beacon of democracy, as a beacon of truth, and as a beacon of we claim that we're sort of the shining beacon of democracy. Why is it that we are interfering with someone who is merely showing very important information for the citizens of the United States to know? We need to know what our government is doing. And it's incredibly concerning and incredibly embarrassing to be a member of a country that is not only antagonizing people who are speaking out, but antagonizing citizens of other countries who are doing their job. They are releasing information that is of great value. They are releasing information that the American public and the international community need to know. And when you combine that with cases like Eric Snowden, when you combine that with other cases, it really shows that in this country we are going down a line that will not only be scary for us, but also we have a responsibility as one of the economic superpowers to show the moral way. And it emboldens other countries to do some of the same actions. We all got very upset about the incident in Saudi Arabia with Khashoggi, and yet we are really going towards that line ourselves.
What is your opinion on the two candidates right now that are up for president, Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Your opinion on the two presidential candidates, Trump and Biden?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to speak merely for myself. I am not speaking for anyone outside of myself.
Of course.
My plan, as far as Donald Trump and Joe Biden goes, is to vote. I think that it is a basic responsibility. It is the bare minimum. I don't think that we should have I voted stickers. I think that we should have I didn't vote stickers, because it is absolutely imperative that we vote. Do I like Joe Biden? No. Do I think he's a good presidential choice? No. Do I think he should have won the primary? No. Do I think he's going to make a good president? No. Do I think that we need to do everything we can to get Donald Trump out of office, who is an active fascist, who is an active, open racist? Yes. My hope is that we as a country vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who is a terrible vice presidential pick as well. We get them in office, and then we immediately hold them as accountable as any elected leader has ever been in this country. And if they won't be held accountable, which my suspicion is they won't, we do everything in our power to find someone who can lead this country in a proper, responsible way and attacks injustice in this country, and also will do everything in their power to lead this country towards a better place. So my request would be for everyone to vote for Joe Biden and then immediately hold their nose, plug their nose, leave. I know you're not going to feel great about it. I know he's a bad choice, but ultimately at this point, nonsense conservatism is a better choice in the temporary than active fascism. At this point, we have to be concerned with choosing who we are going to fight. And I would rather fight someone who is useless than someone who is actively against equality in this country.
Well, thank you, Sean, for coming on here. I also wanted to ask if there's anything else you would like to let the audience know.
A few things. The first thing is, please do not just use mainstream news as a source. While they can be very useful and they do have a lot of resources that citizen journalists do not have, please, I encourage you, go on Instagram, go on Twitter, even go on some of the more independent news sources. Things like LA Free Press are great. Please, please, please watch citizen journalism so you can actually see what's going on in these protests. The police in this country, the people who are protecting the police, are lying to you. These protests are valid. These protests are needed. These protests are absolutely within people's First Amendment rights to do. And if we do not protect them, then this country is doomed, and we will never fix the problems that we have. And Black people, brown people, Native people will continue to die in the street. It is your responsibility to be informed. It is your responsibility to speak out.
Thank you very much, Sean. And you guys, we will be right back. Okay, guys, thank you for tuning in, and please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. We are here with protesters from LA County who have been attending, as well as journalists. Right now, we have Mike Aid. Be like Mike on Instagram if you haven't seen him. He's been doing a lot of great work. Mike Ade. Thank you. Thank you for correcting me. Thank you for being here, Mike. Appreciate it. So Mike, you've been...
I kind of lost you.
You lost me? Okay. Let me know when you can hear me, or I can just... Okay. So Mike, can you tell me what your experience has been documenting and attending these protests, specifically regarding the police and any counter-protest movement?
It's wow. It's been interesting to say the absolute least. I mean, since I started documenting at the end of May, things have just progressively gotten more and more intense. As far as actual encounters with the police, I want to say about 2 weeks ago, things really kind of hit their peak in South LA. Groups of peaceful protesters were met with a tremendous amount of force that I can't even begin to explain. We were shot with pepper balls, tear gas, rubber bullets. Like it's like they literally threw their full arsenal of non-lethal weapons at a group of peaceful protesters. It's it's troubling that the police or not even the police, let's be specific here, the sheriff's department is choosing to have this low of a level of tolerance towards people who are just exercising their rights to, freely gather and express their frustrations with the current state of things in this country.
Yeah. And what do you mean by defunding the police or abolishing the police? What would that look like? Because to a lot of people,
for me personally, defunding the police is...
No, go ahead.
What would it look like? I think it's more of a reallocation type situation where, because obviously no one is expecting a lawless society. And I think certain people hear defund the police and they instantly just run with that narrative. When in reality, like these funds and the massive budgets that are allocated towards police departments could go to much better causes. In Los Angeles specifically, homelessness is a major issue, to say the least. You have issues within school, like school funding. You have mental health problems for people. Like all this money that's going towards a police department can absolutely go towards the people. Like funds need to be reallocated, towards the people, because ultimately, if you better people, you're not going to need police in the way that they currently exist.
And what is your opinion on how people like Mayor Garcetti, Jackie Lacey, and our governor have handled the issue of police brutality in Los Angeles?
I think pertaining to Jackie Lacey, we could attack that first. Her track record kind of speaks for itself. The fact that I want to say at this point it's 623 people have died under her kind of reign, and she has yet to hold anybody accountable for their actions it's troubling. Because at the end of the day, like as people, all we really want is, people to be held accountable for their actions. The police hold citizens accountable for their actions, and in some cases they actually, set people up and things like that. But if the police are the ones that are holding people to a certain standard, they need to hold themselves to a higher standard. But under Jackie Lacey, that's not happening, because you essentially get to gun people down and you get a free pass. And as far as Garcetti, I'm personally not a fan, because it just seems like he is kind of spineless to a certain extent. And what's really interesting is you have people from both sides of the fence who just don't like him. So to be disliked by both sides, that really means that you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Malcolm X and Fred Hampton were both members of the Black Panther Party, and were anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. What is your opinion on both capitalism? What is your opinion on the Black Panther Party and how they were anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist? What is your opinion on our U.S. capitalism and our system and our U.S. imperialism?
I think capitalism, honestly, it's the root of all evil, because you prioritize kind of profit over people. And if you really think about how life is supposed to be lived, like, money obviously is supposed to, come and go, but money shouldn't be the be all and end all for you in society. In this country specifically, money is everything. Whereas if you go to other countries around the world, like, there are places where there are people that make substantially less money than they do in America, but their quality of living is higher, their happiness is higher, because they get to really live life. In America, there's just so much of an onus just on money, and I think people get exploited here. I mean, let's be honest here. Jeff Bezos, you can run down the list of billionaires in this country, and you can see how much money that they've made during this pandemic and during this recession. And people love to actually cite the peaceful protesters as rioters and looters, when in reality, like, you have these people who have doubled and tripled their wealth during a time where things are supposed to be bad for everybody. So with the margin, like the margin of wealth inequality just increasing exponentially like that, I mean, it's obvious that there's a problem. And I'm not a fan of it at all. And
a lot of our money goes into our military. And it goes into the military-industrial complex, where we go and we bomb people in nearly every country. We start, these wars. What is your opinion on what we could do with that money, and instead of wasting it all on the military?
I mean, again, I think the money should be redistributed to citizens within this country, and I'm not talking about handouts being given, but just bettering, even the streets, bettering the healthcare system. Like, there's so many better ways that money can be spent versus going out and bombing people and essentially trying to kind of de facto rule countries. Like, to me, we're at a point in society where we shouldn't still be going to war with each other, because we should be evolved enough as people to understand that war doesn't lead to anything positive. It just leads to death. So I'm very against the war machine that is the United States at this moment.
In many protests, we are hearing, we need to get Trump out, etc. But we've rarely heard people say anything regarding Biden. Biden wrote the 1994 crime bill that was signed into law by Bill Clinton. This bill cemented the decades of placing many Black and brown people in jail, basically enforcing the 13th Amendment into the prison system. Do you think Biden is going to bring about real change, or is that up to something else?
I personally don't think Biden is going to bring about real change, but I think Biden is a stable-minded person, considering what the opposition is. And personally, I mean, I'm not his fan at all. Like, I'm really upset that I've been placed in a position where I have to choose literally between a rock and a hard place. But as far as Biden, I mean, it's obvious, like, he's not the one. But Biden, Trump, I'm personally going to side with Biden, because, again, I'd rather rock with the devil that I know versus the one that I completely can't trust at all. Yes, Biden is not perfect, but he's not Donald Trump. Like, Donald Trump refuses to even acknowledge the fact that, Breonna Taylor was killed in the manner that she was, and that essentially the officers that did so were slapped on the wrist. Like, a wall got more justice than Breonna Taylor, and Donald Trump wouldn't answer questions pertaining to that. So, again, going back to the theme of accountability, if the president isn't willing to be accountable for his actions, like, I can't stand by him. I can't support him in any way, shape, or form. I feel like if Biden was at least in power, he would at least give us some answers. So, yeah.
Have you been attacked by the sheriff or the LAPD while documenting these protests?
Could you repeat that question?
Sure. Have you been attacked by the sheriff or the LAPD for documenting these protests, or arrested, or targeted?
So I mean, I was definitely detained. I was detained en route to a protest. I was simply walking down the sidewalk with my camera and a helmet in hand because over the past 3 days leading up to this, the sheriff's unleashed again that arsenal of non-lethal weapons, and so I was trying to protect myself. And en route, a sheriff's car spotted me and the friend that I was walking with, and they immediately pulled aside. And next thing you knew, that they were jumping out of the car, and I was detained. And again, here I am just walking on the street. They put me through the entire process. They wouldn't actually give me their names. It took them a good amount of time to actually explain why I was being detained. They told me that I fit the description of a suspect who allegedly was carrying a gun in the area, which is, it's a typical line that's been used time and time again to essentially stop and frisk people of color. And yeah, at that point, they threw me in the back of the car, and they obviously checked my record, and there's absolutely nothing there. So I'm sitting in the back of the car waiting for these people to release me. And when they finally did, they went and took a picture of me without my consent, and then they just let me go. It was a relatively humiliating experience because, again, here I am not committing any crimes whatsoever and just walking down the sidewalk as an independent journalist, and this is how I'm being met by the sheriff's department. In addition to that, obviously the incidents that happened in South LA. I was standing with members of the press along, I guess, the front line, and the sheriffs just unleashed a barrage of pepper balls, flashbangs, the whole nine, and we all had to run and scatter indiscriminately. And in addition to that, I mean, this isn't my personal experience, but these same sheriffs actually detained a full-on member of the press, and she clearly identified herself time and time again, but they still did what they wanted to do, threw her in the back of a cop car and drove away. So again, their track record, it's not the best at all, and they clearly have an issue with people providing the world with a real depiction of what's actually happening.
And right now we have for VP Kamala Harris, who's described as a top cop, by herself. She's described, she jailed a lot of people for minimal things like marijuana. With candidates like this, with candidates like Biden and Harris, how do the people take it into their own hands to actually bring about this change? Is it just protest, or should there be a different tactic also?
I think protest is one means that change can come, but also, I hate to say it, but voting, and not even on a national level, but on a local level. Because at the end of the day, we are in control of local policy. Yes, Kamala doesn't have the greatest track record, but over the past, I want to say 5 to 6 years, she's actively tried to kind of atone for her sins to a certain extent. She's shown growth as a person. And at the end of the day, there is no perfect candidate. But if you can show that you're willing to listen and learn from the people that you're supposed to serve, I think that's a good sign. I'm not necessarily happy with her or thrilled with her as the vice presidential pick, similar to Biden. But again, I'd much rather roll with them versus, the Trump train.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell us before you head out?
I would just encourage people to stay vigilant, stay in the streets, and if anything, trust your local and independent journalists, because they're going to give you a real version of the story and what's going on in this world. I mean, having been again on the front lines in South LA, seeing a journalist from Fox News specifically be out there and actively spew lies about what's going on as he stands behind the police line. It's troubling. It's very troubling to know that this man has a large platform and the ability to reach mass amounts of people when he's lacking the basic and fundamental, number one rule of journalism, which is being a journalist of integrity. And if anything, I would encourage you guys to actually get out there and look at the independent journalists who are actually trying to tell a factual story.
Thank you, Mike, so much for being here. We appreciate it. Guys, we'll be right back with our next guest. All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here now with Persephone, who has been attending many of these protests. Persephone, thank you. Thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. Okay. So you've been to many of these protests. You were at the tunnel, though, specifically, and you've also experienced police brutality in the Dijon Kissé protests. Tell us your thoughts of what it's like to protest in LA County.
It's erratic. It's often very frightening. The night of the tunnel, when we were in the tunnel, they basically trapped us in on both sides and forced us to put down our shields and everything, and we had our hands up and had already surrendered everything. It was a peaceful protest anyway, but we'd already surrendered, and while we were already surrendered and having our hands up and willing to do whatever they told us to do, that was when they started shooting. And similar to that, 2 nights at the Dijon Kissé protests, where we would be either there was no order to disperse before they started shooting, or one of the nights I was there was a dispersal order and we were dispersing and we were already leaving when they started shooting. So there's a difficulty with being able to expect what you're going to face at a lot of these protests, because the police are erratic and unpredictable, and they have a loose connection to their own rules and laws.
Similar question to what I've asked before. How do you feel the leaders in LA have done regarding police brutality, meaning the officials, the mayor, the governor, the city council, etc.?
They've been utterly useless. They've been entirely useless. One of the things that bothered me personally was when the mayor Garcetti was talking about how one of the initiatives they're trying to have for the LAPD is hiring more trans officers, and that really irritated me on a personal level, because as a trans individual, the night of the tunnel, I was targeted and sexually assaulted by LAPD because I'm trans, and in the most literal sense, she sexually assaulted me because I'm trans. So hearing that there was those kind of initiatives going on for the LAPD when there's people sexually assaulting trans people within the LAPD, it's just a bit frustrating and confusing, because there's clearly no real interest in protecting the safety of minorities or trans people at all. And yet there's language of adding them to the same force that's already oppressing us. And frankly, I don't have much interest in having more trans cops so I can get patted down illegally and illegally searched by another trans person. That doesn't make me feel any better about it.
Yeah, that seems like a lot of symbolic platitudes.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about Malcolm X and Fred Hampton. They were both members of the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party was largely anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. How do you feel about capitalism versus communism?
I'm very anti-capitalist, because the capitalist structure, it exists to intentionally exploit certain people. And whenever there's a system that requires inequality to function, the main people affected will always be, racial minorities or sexual minorities, and, anyone who doesn't fit into a white, cisgender, heteronormative version of society, versus communism putting more focus on the community working together, versus individualistic ideas that capitalism contains, just appeals a lot more to me, because as a trans person, there have been a lot of times where my safety was only ensured by my community, and then just if we really want to talk about communism, America is a lot more communistic than people think it is. I mean, the whole founding principles behind America's government was that the federal government would have to intervene in communities and cities and states as little as possible, so that individual communities could have as much autonomy as was needed. And that's kind of what's at the core of communism in general, is having communities and workplaces and stuff be autonomous and able to function as much as possible with just the people who live and work there and are most affected by it running it, and with little need for intervention from the government and things like that.
And do you plan on voting in this presidential election? And in general, do you think voting in this country is is counts and is good?
I'm going to be fully honest. I am going to vote, but only because people will yell at me about it if I don't. But if we're being fully honest, voting is not really going to help us because, like, regardless of who wins, we're still going to be living under a lot of the same fascism. A lot of people will say that fascism in America was not present until Trump. But if we're being fully honest, fascism in America was always there. It was just easy to ignore by, the most privileged classes. And Trump has just exposed it to everyone else. But America has always been fascistic. It's a nation that requires fascistic government in order to be able to continue functioning and existing.
So if America has always been fascistic then, and voting isn't going to solve the problem, what will?
Voting won't solve the problem because both parties are inherently fascistic in general. So if we're talking about what will solve the problem, if we're being fully honest, we need more revolutionary ideas. We need our communities to be able to be autonomous without, input from the government, because clearly the government does not have our best intentions at heart. Just a lot of things like that. We need more focus being put on things like education and mental health and housing and food security. I mean, under capitalism, everything has to make money, but there are certain things that just shouldn't. There shouldn't be companies that make money off of people having medical needs, because it's our duty as people to take care of each other. There shouldn't be people making money off of someone having a home, because it should be our duty as a society to make sure that everyone has somewhere safe to sleep and stuff. It's our duty as a society to make sure everyone can eat, and we're entirely capable of it. And that means we have a responsibility to do it.
What do you say to people that say this, that Black Lives Matter isn't an all-encompassing movement, meaning that they want other focuses on economics? How does economics tie into this?
Well, I mean, everything about, like, Black Lives Matter encompasses everything, because Black lives are under attack on every front. If you want to talk about economics, Black Lives Matter applies to that, because until all Black people have equal access to housing, Black lives don't matter. Until all Black people have access to adequate medical care, all Black lives don't matter. And if we're living under a system that doesn't ensure that, then that needs to be changed. So that's part of the goal of Black Lives Matter, is economic. It is regarding things like healthcare. It is regarding things like housing and private property, and all of these different encompassing topics. It covers everything.
Let's say Joe Biden wins the presidency. He also wrote the 1994 crime bill. He also said he's not going to defund the police. How does this movement hold him accountable then?
Honestly, I don't know, because, like, if Biden becomes president, then the police response to protests will stay the same. There will still be the same violence. Nothing's really going to change. And we're just going to be stuck in another loop of, what happened when Obama became president, where it was, okay, well, racism is over now because, we have a Black president, or racism is over now because we have a Black vice president. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to go to sleep because they think that now that Joe Biden's won and Trump is gone, excuse me, they think that now that Joe Biden has won and Trump is gone, that all of the issues are going to be solved. The same way they did under Obama, where they thought everything was going to be solved now because we have a Black president, but nothing actually changed.
So how does the youth and the future get things to change? Is it more direct actions, a general strike? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, we're a lot more direct actions, general strikes and things like that. We've come to a point now where it's time for us to start putting more checks on our government and establishing the fact that it is the people who have power over the government and not the other way around. The government as an institution is given its power by the people in return for a certain set of benefits that they're supposed to provide, and those benefits are not being provided. So now the social contract has been broken. It is the fiduciary responsibility of the people to take back that power and create a system that does provide those things that are needed, that does provide communities with the care that are needed, to succeed, that does protect Black lives, that does protect trans lives, a system that doesn't commit genocide at the border in the name of a border that doesn't even exist, that was placed there by people who stole this land from the people who are already living here.
And we saw the Breonna Taylor trial. Basically, the grand jury decided that they weren't going to prosecute any of the officers who killed Breonna Taylor. We also just saw protesters get run over in Denver, Colorado. Is it time for protests to take on new tactics?
It has been that time, because the fact of the matter is no social change, no positive social change in America that has ever taken place took place through entirely peaceful means. That's quite literally propaganda, because the definition of violence that people use is very different from what violence actually entails, because having a community that can economically separate itself from the main government is a form of violence against the government. That is a form of violent action. That's something that we should be doing. And then rioting and looting and stuff like that can actually be really important, because if you're targeting companies and large corporations that take advantage of people and able to strike back at them and force them to submit to the government or to the will of the people, that is part of what will solve our issues. Like LGBT people didn't really start getting rights in America until after the Stonewall riots. If any oppressed class wants to gain respect and if any oppressed class wants to gain respect and status in the country they live in, they have to prove that they're willing to fight for it. And sometimes that does entail violent action, but not because we want to be violent, but because our attempts to protest and to gain our rights, regardless of whether they're peaceful and violent, will be met with violence. Nearly every protest I've ever been at has been entirely peaceful, where nothing happened, there was no destruction, there was no tagging or anything, and yet we were still met with violence. So if our attempts to peacefully change the system we live under are being met with violence, why should we not be able to defend ourselves or to strike back? It is our right as people to defend our own lives. And if the government happens to be the entity putting our lives in danger, that right does not change at all.
Is there anything else that we missed that you'd like to speak on?
Say that again?
Is there anything else you'd like to speak on that we might have missed?
Not that I can think of.
All right, Persephone, thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. And we'll be right back, you guys.
All right.
All right, guys, welcome back. We have activist Andy on right now. Activist Andy, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me here. Very
So,
happy to
well,
be here.
yeah, thank you for being here. And we actually saw you get detained illegally during the Dijon Cassé protests. You were streaming live on Instagram, and we found you. Tell us about that experience and how that happened.
Yeah. So, after leaving the protest in South Central Los Angeles, at the sheriff's station, um, me and my friend were driving. The protest was getting a little too violent, so we decided to leave and evacuate. And as we were leaving, we were followed by a cop car, and I immediately knew that they were trying to tail us, and basically waiting for something to pull us over and detain us and start questioning us, which is exactly what they did. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was driving perfectly fine, but they knew who we were and they knew who I was. So they pulled me over on a charge of not having my dog Elliot in a cage in the car, which is not actually a law in the state of California. And it was just a charge basically to pull me over, to have a reason to pull me over, which was a unlawful stop. But as they pulled me over and as they approached me, I could already feel the hostile attitude that they had towards us. My friend and I just felt like we needed to comply, or else our faces were going to be on the pavement, or something worse was going to happen. They immediately both, one cop came to my window, and then the other came to my friend's window, asked for her ID, even though she was not driving. And then they took my ID. I gave them my ID. They went back, did whatever they do. And then they came back and said that I needed to step out of the car. And at that point, like I said, we're not living in a state where, I know my rights and my friend knows her rights, and I would have done everything possible to, stand up for the rights we have. However, we're not living in that time where our rights really they're being squashed. Basically, we don't have any rights right now where we can't even peacefully protest, and that's one of our essential rights in this country, is to have the ability to peacefully protest, peacefully or assemble in any way we actually want. I mean, we don't want to. When it comes to peaceful protest, I believe there's a protest is a protest. I don't believe what any kind of terminology that comes with a protest. The Boston Tea Party was a protest. The Boston Massacre was a protest. So when we talk about that type of protesting, we gotta maybe stop labeling it in a certain way. But that when I was pulled over, I immediately knew that we're not in a state where we can stand up for or voice our rights, because the police don't care. They don't care that we know our rights. They're gonna try to intimidate us in order to comply, and that's what happened that night. I was detained, taken back to a cop car, where they asked us questions about where we lived, what we did, what we worked, what tattoos we had on, and even our Instagram handles. They asked if we had an Instagram, and they wanted to write all that down, basically to start creating profiles of protesters, most likely to down the line start charging protesters with crimes such as sedition, which is what Bill Barr has started, working on.
Exactly. Exactly. Did they take your picture, by the way?
Oh yes, they did take my picture, and I mean, I've had countless protesters say that if they've been detained, they take a picture with their digital cameras. So I assume we're somewhere up on a board with targets on us, and that's completely not a overstatement. That is facts. That's happening. We know it's happening because even today, again, there was patrol cars circling, a helicopter above us, circling around just to see what we are doing, what we're up to.
Tell us about the difference in the way the police or the sheriff treat people depending on the location, like South LA versus West Hollywood.
Well, I mean, it's evident how we have it all on video. We have it all. Protesters have seen it live. I've seen it live because I've been at both events where we can be in South Central LA and be met with an occupation, militarized occupation from the LASD, shot with rubber bullets, tear gas, pepper bullets, all of these tactical weapons, tear gas, which was banned by the Geneva Convention in 1925, basically a chemical weapon that's used on citizens. And it's banned in war. So I do not understand what makes LASD think that they can deploy that tactical force on civilians in the United States. So if people haven't really seen that, haven't really realized that what they're doing is a war crime, then I think people are going to start seeing it soon, because the election is only a few weeks away. But when you look at how Waco, West Hollywood, is treated when it comes to the LASD, there's a sheriff's station right in front of the intersection of Santa Monica and San Vicente, and we were there. However, they didn't deploy tear gas, they didn't deploy rubber bullets, pepper bullets, any of those tactical weapons on protesters there, because obviously we're in a more affluent white area where there's literally people having drinks in bars right across from us, and they're literally just watching as an occupation is taking place right in front of their faces. So it's a very dystopian kind of visual. When you're there, you visually see, protesting an occupation right in front of you, and then people having drinks at a bar.
So let's talk about that for a minute, the people having drinks at a bar. How do you get the attention of those people? It seems you have to make people uncomfortable. What is your opinion on going to protest in suburban areas, or your opinion on going to protest at the houses of, say, Mayor Garcetti, etc.?
I think those protests are extremely important. That's where we should be focusing on all of our energy. And then the other energy is in building up those communities that already know how the police are and how brutal they are and how militarized and how oppressive they are to those communities. Those communities already know. South Central already knows that the police are bad, are not, for lack of a better term, I don't want to start cussing in here, but yeah, they're just not meant to protect that community. And when we look at how, sorry, I lost my train of thoughts. I've been out there almost like every day, so I'm a little bit, but I lost my train of thought. Can you repeat the question for me again?
Oh yeah, no problem. So how do we get these people from the bars and into the streets, is a chant that I've been hearing.
Sorry, no, you're right. I lost my train of thought. See what it just went. Whoop. But these affluent areas don't know what's going on. They're so blinded by this country is very individualistic, so they always just care about themselves. And we need to wake up these affluent areas, because I don't think they understand, or maybe they do. But if I were to ask let's say I went to a Waco protest, and I were to ask people there if they were at the bars and say, if you were a white person and you would be okay with being treated as a black and brown person, raise your hand. I guarantee you none of these people would raise their hands, because they already know the system is brutal and what it does. I don't know if they care. There's a lack of empathy in these communities. And honestly, we need to go to these locations because again, the communities in South Central, they already know this. They already know what the police do. We need to start building those communities up by investing in those communities, by defunding LASD and LAPD, and investing in those communities to build them up so that they can look like Beverly Hills, for example, if someone were to say as a comparing it. But that's where the money needs to go. The LASD and the LAPD do not protect and serve.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to share regarding your experience? Because you've been to so many protests, so we would definitely like to hear anything you want to highlight.
I think all of the protests, everybody has the same end goal. All of these protests, when it comes to cancel rent, preventing evictions, Black Lives Matter, the climate change, all of these different protests happening across the LA County area, we all have the same end goal, which is helping preserve human life. We all care about other humans, and helping preserve our earth will help preserve life. So I think everyone needs to come together to really have a huge force in Los Angeles against the system. However, since we are considered very liberal, the people here are very liberal, but we still live under the same system as the United States. So no matter how liberal the people here are, if the system is still the same system that has existed for 400 plus years, then it can't be reformed. It just has to be dismantled, and something new has to be created.
Thank you, Andy, for coming on. Guys, we'll be right back with our next guest.
Thank you.
Alrighty, guys, we are back, and our next guest, her name is Sunflower, and Sunflower has also attended several of these protests. Sunflower, tell us about your experience attending these protests in Los Angeles regarding both the police and also the community you've met.
My experience I actually started protesting this year when George Floyd died. And I was in what we call the Battle of Fairfax. So that was my first protest. We were tear gassed. They shot rubber bullets and stuff. It's crazy to see how much the police brutality has increased, but it also doesn't surprise me. It's also with the community, it's connected a lot of people who have never thought that they would be in this position, but also a lot of people who might have saw it coming, and it's helped the community come back together, because for a while I think we all felt very disconnected from one another.
Yeah. So there was an injury that you had. Can you tell us about this particular protest and this injury?
Yeah, so that was a counter protest to a Trump rally protest that happened every week on Friday in Tujunga, and each week it became increasingly more dangerous and volatile, mainly due to agitators from the Trump side crossing over and getting in people for the Black Lives Matter counter protests face. A lot of times they weren't stopped by the cops. I had gone out there like the third week it was really violent and heavy. I actually went out there twice. So the first time, there was a brawl, but no police involved, like no rubber bullets, none of that. It was mainly like fighting between groups. Again, mainly caused by the Trump supporters, unfortunately. And the second protest, the police met us with the rubber bullets, pepper bullets, but continually let Trump supporters cross over to our side. They didn't do anything to them. They let people, I have it on my Instagram, there's videos of them macing people from the Trump side. Well, the cops just walk by and do absolutely nothing. But as soon as our side was ready to step in the street, they were ready to shoot us. Mm-hmm. And there was this girl who was getting pushed back. She had a red hat on, long brown hair. I do know her personally, but she was getting shoved by the police in their baton. And I was going over to protect her, and as soon as I stepped forward, I had Gatorade in one hand and Oreos in the other with my hands up. As soon as I stepped forward, they shot me in the hip groin area, which I think they were really aiming for everyone. I was hit with a rubber bullet right on my hip, and then seconds later, right below it, hit with a pepper bullet, like literally right below it. It was not fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to hear that happened. How do you feel our leaders here in the community have reacted to police brutality, like reining in the police officers? Have they done anything really to fix the situation?
Community leaders such as like our mayor.
The mayor? Yeah.
You know what? I really want to say Mayor Eric Garcetti can go fuck himself. I was at Black Unity when it was raided. He met with Donald Trump in City Hall right before, and we have been told that Donald Trump was watching the raid. So Eric Garcetti signed off on a peaceful protest occupying zone to be demolished, surrounded at 3:30 in the morning. By over 300, both LASD and LAPD. They gave us 12 minutes to pack up all of our belongings. But immediately started to destroy our little barricade we built up and anything attached to it, any tent attached to it. I really appreciate the body cam footage. I want a statement from the mayor about that. They destroyed a home and a community that we built. And any problems that we had in that community, we handled it as a community. And so Black unity gave me something I've never had, which is people that actually genuinely care about me and my well-being, and that are fighting for similar causes that I'm fighting. And we're all here for the love of Black people and also our hatred for the system.
Yeah, the system of capitalism seems to be causing a lot of these problems. What is your opinion on that system?
Capitalism needs to be destroyed and abolished. Money is a construct. So is the society we've built around it, and everything can be remolded.
A lot of people, not just on the right, but on the mainstream media, have said you guys are violent looters and protesters paid by George Soros and are all members of Antifa. Can you respond to that? What is Antifa?
Antifa means anti-fascist, anti-tyrant, anti-dictator. That's what it means to me. But it's not an organization. It's an ideology, and therefore cannot be marked as a terrorist organization, because it's all individuals with independent beliefs and different branching viewpoints on that. That's what I say about Antifa. And then going back to the violence, there is no violence when it's property. There's violence when the police are shooting peaceful protesters in the head with lead bullets in South LA. Shooting a pepper bullet at a 7-year-old for touching their tactical slinky in South LA. But in WAHO, people can twerk on that. It shows disparity. The only violence I've seen is from the police department and the sheriff's department.
Are you voting in this election? And if so, what else should people be doing besides voting?
So I believe voting is important to do. Do I think it's going to solve everything? No. The reason I think it's important to vote is because people like in Puerto Rico, they're United States citizens, but they can't vote. So it is a privilege for us to be able to vote any kind of way. But I do think that what protesting needs to go down, more tactical actions. I believe in full revolution. And I'm not scared to say that.
What do you mean by revolution? Like upending the system, overturning the system, dismantling the system?
Yeah. Abolish the system as a whole and rebuild it from the ground up the way it should. We need to not only defund, but abolish the police force, reallocate any of this money and wealth into the communities that they've been terrorizing. That's what I mean by system reform. I personally don't believe we need to have a president. I personally don't believe that we need Supreme Court judges. I think we've moved past that point in human evolution, that we don't need an occupying army to come in and protect infrastructure, protect buildings, protect a barricade. The people need protecting, and we can protect ourselves because the LAPD aren't doing it, and neither is the sheriff's department. The government isn't for us. They're not for Black people. And all of these other problems are intersectional, and the majority that they impact is Black lives.
Is there anything else you'd like to speak on that we might have missed?
I think the system as a whole needs to go. We need serious education reform. And I want to say, if Antifa is a terrorist organization, then so should the KKK be, and the police force.
All right, Sunflower. Thank you very much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
We'll be right back, you guys. Hey guys, welcome back. Next we have Roxanne Allen. She is a leader in the community, has been organizing and leading several protests. Roxanne experienced the disaster of the night that was dubbed the tunnel. Roxanne, tell us about your experience at that time.
So yeah, I think the tunnel experience was interesting because it was the first time I think that a lot of organizations were able to collaborate and set up something that was a solidified march for the community. We had been marching as we have done since the death of George Floyd and many others. And we had originally started marching into the tunnel where we kind of decided to turn around, and we were kettled into this short space, and LAPD
This is what happened.
met us with just such brutal force. I myself, I was one of the many people who helped just kind of lead the march. And LAPD, as usual, I mean, like legally, they have to, when they declare a protest unlawful, they have to give a dispersal order 3 times. They have to give us a route out and a way out to leave. And it was interesting because of all the times that we had been protesting, this is the first time that they decided to announce the dispersal order in Spanish. And they just shot out into the crowd without actually giving us a way out. I myself had turned away at some point to make sure that the crowd was okay, and Officer Murphy bum rushed me and attacked me and ripped off this back brace that I have because I go to physical therapy often. I do have those issues, but even so, I come out often, and it was crazy how that force for just literally speaking your right to say that Black Lives Matter, that was the reaction. That someone like myself, who has never had any legal issues, has had nothing but a clean record, is just a normal citizen, was met with a grown man on my back, putting me into a chokehold that is illegal, 100% illegal. That it's not even something that LAPD or LASD should be using, that they've known not to use since '82. I don't know, for whatever reason, I was able to drag myself to a group of protesters while still being in a chokehold, while LAPD was kind of surrounding me so that our press team couldn't take pictures of my attack. I was lucky enough to have met someone's ankle, and the crowd pulled me in, thankfully, and saved me from the situation that I was in. And even afterwards, Officer Murphy and his gang of just thugs who decided to attack peaceful protesters, they were looking at me in the crowd and stalking me as if I was some kind of prey. And this is something that happens not only to Black leaders of the movement, it's starting to happen to our press, who are documenting our truth, to protesters who have been coming out in support. And it's a big issue because I left that night with a lot of bodily injuries, just like a lot of these protesters who are coming out here. And the response that LASD and LAPD has been giving to simply people saying Black Lives Matter, not more, not especially, they just matter. It's ridiculous. It's atrocious.
And you've talked about you've talked about the law enforcement, but can you talk a little bit about any sort of calls you've made to the community, city council, the mayor? Has anybody actually reached out to help?
No, here's the funny thing. Myself, along with a lot of organizations of this movement, they've planned many actions in regards to just legislative change, in regards to actually just being on ground and being heard, so that we put pressure onto the city to actually do something. And none of these calls, the only thing that we've been met with is police brutality. And again, it plays into a big role as to what we're fighting for, because essentially the system is supporting criminals, which is LAPD and LASD.
Exactly. And so how does it make you feel when people say that you are a violent protester, that you are not even from Los Angeles? How do you respond to that? What do you have to say to those people?
I think I hear it a lot, which is really funny. I think it's ridiculous. I am a native of Los Angeles. I am born and bred in Los Angeles. I plan on dying in the city. A lot of people here are from Los Angeles, and regardless, I think LA specifically, our community is like a big pot of diversity. We do have a lot of implants from outside of the city who have moved here, who have now assimilated into our community, and should be taken into account, because regardless, we're all citizens, we're all humans, and regardless of where you're from, it's irrelevant if your main objective of coming out is just stating that, listen, Black lives matter, minority lives matter, constitutional rights are being violated. There shouldn't be a barrier for people to speak up on that. And this is coming from someone who's born and bred in LA. I welcome anyone who's willing to fight for my brothers and sisters' lives.
What's the next step in this movement? Because we are seeing a lot of protests, but we're also seeing increasing police brutality on protesters as well as journalists. What is the next step as far as the protests go tactically?
That's a good question. You know, we have a lot of just bright-minded Black leaders. We have a lot of allies who are tactically skilled with dealing with these situations. I think the biggest step, and it always has been from the beginning, is just being vocal. It's allowing our voices to be heard and making sure that that movement keeps moving. We see a lot in Los Angeles that people are turning a blind eye to peaceful protesters being attacked by cops. The minute that, and again, the Black community deals with it, that when something hits the fan, all of a sudden we're concentrated on why were they there? What were they doing? What was their background like? Which is ridiculous, because we're not focusing on the root of the issue, which is why is it that LAPD and LASD cannot deal with situations like this and de-escalate situations like this when our lives are on their hand. So I think the biggest thing for this movement is to make sure that people continue coming out. It doesn't matter what skill set you have. It doesn't matter if you're not as educated. Come out, have those uncomfortable conversations, and continue fighting for this, because it's essential that people realize that we're turning into a fascist state. And LAPD and LASD are the hands that are allowing this to happen. And to cut that off and make sure we put people in place who are actually for the people, actually for civil rights, actually for just making sure that we're being taken care of appropriately when we're being detained or stopped for no fucking reason. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. There's a lot of poverty here. There's a homelessness, there's evictions, there's people who aren't able to pay their rent. Meanwhile, there's also luxury high-rises, mansions. How do we incorporate that? How do you incorporate that into the movement that's happening for Black lives and against police brutality?
Well, it has a lot to do with it, because when we talk about poverty, we also have to think about redlining and the communities that are affected by it, which mostly it is, unfortunately, Black people and minorities in that sense. I think a lot of it, how would I say, the way that it plays into it is that LAPD and LASC have an atrocious budget that they don't deserve. They're not working for. They're constantly attacking people. That budget that they have should be put into community funded programs like preventative cares in regards to mental health, in regards to like getting systems in place to take care of our sanitation issues on the streets with trash all over. It plays into the fact that like our issues with poverty, the issues with that, the whole problem with us having people experiencing homelessness now and it being such a big issue with eviction coming up because of what's been going on with the pandemic. People keep saying we don't have the money to fix these issues. We do, but we're backing it into a system that is a modern form of slave catching. There is the money there. There are thousands of Americans, people from Los Angeles, who have to face eviction in less than a week, while Jeff Bezos is profiting off of all of us, while big corporations are profiting off of our struggles. So the whole idea that we're dealing with poverty and that there's homelessness. Yes, there is. We have the money. If you really care about that, then you would focus on defunding LAPD and reallocating that budget into the community, and focusing on the people who are dealing with evictions, who are dealing with
with this pandemic.
All right, Roxanne, is there anything else you'd like to tell people, the audience watching right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would like to reiterate on what BLM was speaking about at their Dracula AC event yesterday is that we're at a time where we're dealing with a force that does not care about our constitutional rights. We're dealing with LAPD and LASD's executioners who are pulling peaceful protesters off the street without even cause and finding ways to trump up charges that they don't even know what they're charging us for. Meanwhile, they're allowing people like Kyle Rittenhouse to kill peaceful protesters and walk right past them, offering him a bottle of water. I think it's really important that people, although there are moments where we're put into a situation where we're afraid, we have to remember the fact that we are fighting to be on the right side of history. And it's important that we look at these moments and not fear away, but realize that it's even more important that we stand up and fight back. That the fear of losing ourselves and losing our civil rights, our dignity and our freedom should be greater than fearing LASD and their barrel that they're pointing at our faces for no reason, just for speaking up and saying Black Lives Matter. It's not even a political statement, and we're being attacked for it. So people who are watching this and they're not doing anything, I understand the frustration, I understand the fear, but even more so, it's important that you stand up, you come out, you educate yourself on the matter. There are plenty of people who are here who are more than willing to teach everyone about our Black culture. And yeah, please, you have to fight back. It's essentially you're fighting to stand on the right side of history. We don't want to have a third civil rights movement. This should be the last one.
Thank you, Roxana. And guys, we'll be right back. Thank you for the super chat contributions.
Thank you.
All right, guys. This is our last guest for today. Giuliana has also been documenting the protest, and she's here to talk about her experience. Giuliana, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, how has your experience been in general as a journalist, and what got you into doing this?
What got me into doing this? Well, at first, when the George Floyd movement started, I was just going out as a regular protester. I wasn't really documenting too much, but one of the organizers asked me to start photographing. And then that was something that I felt like I could contribute to the movement. So, and it became something I enjoyed doing as well. And the more protests I went to, I noticed the extreme circumstances a lot of the times that it would go to. So I felt like it was important for me to get some sort of press pass or some sort of credential to carry with me, which I soon learned really didn't make a difference. But yeah, it's been very intense experience.
In particular, you've experienced police brutality firsthand. The LASD has not only shot you with various quote-unquote non-lethal weapons, but has also detained you. Can you tell us about the lawsuit you spoke about in the NLG press conference and your experience with the LASD?
Yeah, of course. I'd like to start with saying that, like I said, I was acting as press during the protest on September 8th. People were gathering for justice for Dijon Kesey, and the kind of brutality I faced was the same kind of brutality that the community faces daily. So I just wanted to state that first.
Yeah.
And as far as what happened to me, I was shot 3 times as I was calling for a medic for another person who had been gassed severely. You probably, other people have spoken about the events, but the sheriff started to run at the group that was already dispersing. At that point, I had ran so far away from the dispersal line, I thought that I was safe. I thought that I was fine. Because in my mind, I had already dispersed, but I did see flashbangs. I still heard all the gunshots when I continued down Normandy. I'm sorry, I get a little lost. Yeah, they shot me in the hand, in the shoulder, and in the head. And I was wearing a helmet. And at that point, I was just looking for cover. And I ran towards the car. And when I ran towards the car, I ducked behind, and a sheriff pointed his gun in my face. And then there was another sheriff behind me who kind of dragged my body out. My camera broke from the pressure.
Have there been any actions taken against the sheriffs?
I'm sorry, I don't think I can finish this.
It's okay. It's okay. No problem at all. Yeah, this is bringing up a lot of things, so it's totally okay. Okay, you can just go to me, guys. All right, guys. So as you can see, we've interviewed a vast majority of the protesters who have completely different stories and completely different points of views as to what's happened. When we have been covering not the protest in LA County, in Seattle, in Portland, I've also attended some in Florida. It's always the same narrative that the protesters are being violent looters, that they're outside agitators. But the vast majority of protests since May 30th, the protests where we were kettled, the protests where we were arrested in spite of having credentials, I have seen time and time again the police be the ones inciting this violence. And it's not a narrative that I'm trying to portray for my own political opinion, but it is rather the truth that what I've been seeing. And I invite those people who toil that narrative of police, of the violent agitator, Antifa, crazy person that comes in and is extremely and burns and loots, to really attend a protest and see that the vast majority of them are peaceful. But there's going to come to a point where you're going to push people to defend themselves, and people are going to have to defend themselves. We are seeing weapons of war be used on civilians that have initially, they didn't go there armed with helmets and any sort of gear. They thought, hey, we have the American right to protest. It is in my First Amendment right to say, hey, I don't agree with this. I'm going to stand up and make my voice heard. That's an American right, as inherent as your Second Amendment right, as inherent as your civil liberties. It is in the Constitution. And in the Declaration of Independence, it says that if the government doesn't provide the needs of the people have a right to overthrow the government. These people aren't even trying to do that. They're simply trying to change the system that is oppressive. And this is one end. You know, a lot of us, the Times Pasta and I talk about how economics plays into this, and it absolutely does. Economics plays into how you are treated by the police, whether you're in Beverly Hills. I've seen it myself. The police officers were extremely nice when we were in Beverly Hills versus being in South Central LA, where you're getting shot at constantly. Even if you are a journalist, we saw what happened with the NPR mainstream journalist that was arrested and put on the ground by 6 officers. This isn't a joke. And we wanted to do this specifically to get everybody's story, specifically to fight against that narrative that's being put on by the mainstream media on both ends of the political spectrum. Whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're both using the same narrative of violent looters. The other day, Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi said, we support protests, but not the violent looters and blah, blah, blah. But they failed to talk about if people are looting, and people were looting maybe in the very beginning on May 30th. That's the only time I saw looting, but it was a bunch of homeless people going into these stores and taking it. They failed to mention the looting of the American people that this generation, the millennials and the Generation Z have been experiencing their entire lives by the system of capitalism and the oligarchy. They have been looted from getting any sort of help when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to college, when it comes to housing. We are seeing continuously the wealth come from the working class up to the 1%, the 1% that doesn't pay taxes, the 1% that is making money is getting richer. We're going to have our trillionaires right now. Because of this pandemic, Jeff Bezos is getting richer because people couldn't go outside and they had to use Amazon to get their things. I mean, this isn't a joke. This is all connected. I think this is all part of one giant thing that needs to be addressed. And as a journalist, when I'm seeing journalists get attacked here on the ground, and then I'm seeing Julian Assange be literally taken and attempted to extradite him into America when he's not an American, for simply telling you, the people, the lies that the government did and said, and the way they treated people they deemed as terrorists, all on a pack of lies. That is fascism. Fascism didn't start with Donald Trump. Fascism has been here for a long time. Donald Trump has exposed that fascism, and this is why you're seeing that counter movement against him. Now, people, I think we all need to realize that Joe Biden isn't going to change anything, and what all of these people have said is that we need people out there. We need direct actions, and I think that is what we wanted to highlight today. These people are out in the streets, many of them completely innocent, have been shot at, and that is not okay. And your regurgitation, your automatic thing shouldn't be, well, What were they doing? If they had been complacent, what if everything they did was absolutely perfect and they're still getting attacked? Well, then the system as a whole is fascistic and the system is a problem. So if you want to get to the bottom of things, you go talk to the people. You don't rely on any sort of narrative that's manipulated by videos and political pundits on CNN or Fox or MSNBC or any other outlet that stands to profit off of a certain narrative. And this is why we're going to be continuing to bring you protesters, because it may not be necessarily the most sexy topic to listen to people and their experience, but it should at least give you a sort of empathy and a sort of awareness as to what's going on the streets, because I'm not paying anybody to tell their story. They are telling their story. This is what's happening, whether you like it or not, and whether it fits your political narrative or not. So we're going to be going to Denver tomorrow, and we're going to be covering more protests, and we're going to be covering other things. We cover everything from what's locally happening here to foreign policy to Julian Assange. All of this is connected, and we just want to make sure you guys are aware of how connected everything is. Johnny, did you want to say anything?
No, fam, you just hit it. Yeah, we're going to Denver tomorrow, and just wait for that. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who came on, the protesters who came on. You know, I helped put this along with my team, my wonderful team here, Fee and Pasta. Pasta's been chefing it up. Fee's been asking amazing questions, and I'm making everybody look beautiful. And and this is what we're doing, guys. We're showing you the reality of the situation. This is the reality, and I don't know. We got to keep going, and we appreciate your support.
All right, guys. Thanks for watching. Convo out. Peace.